Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics. This week's questions answered video, light placement in relation to the muzzle on rifles. In case anyone was curious as to how I felt. Now, on with the question. The question specifically was, is there an issue or a preference about light mounting in relation to the muzzle? Should you mount it further forward? Should you mount it further back? I think the question largely depends on how much rail space you have available to you, what light source you're choosing, the muzzle device you're using, and if you're going to run a suppressor most or all of the time or not. So this is my PWS Mark 111 Mod 2. It's an 11.85 inch rifle with a dead air flash hider, and I'm using the Streamlight HLX. As you'll notice, it does sit roughly close to the opening tines on the flash hider. Probably not as concussive as far as shock to the flashlight itself as a break or a comp would be, but it's still a little closer than I'd otherwise be comfortable with. But this rifle spends the majority of its time suppressed, and even when it's unsuppressed, I push the light as far back as I can while still being able to maintain a grip on the gun. And that's one of the key issues with light mounting position, light mounting preferences. If you push it too far back along the rail, especially with the HLX, the mounting hardware is roughly close to 2/3 up the body of the light, which complicates your ability to push the light further forward or bring it further back. And that can compromise your grip depending on the rail length and the overall rifle length. If this was a 14.5 or a 16-inch gun with a comparable rail length, I would have more options when it came to the positioning of the light. But because it is an SBR and it is a shorter rail, I have to put the light somewhere where it's going to allow me to grip the rifle effectively and not interfere with my grip, whether I'm using a traditional right shoulder or if I'm transferring over to a left shoulder grip. I can still get my hands on the gun and still be able to provide that hand support to the rifle. Now the Surefire, the Scout series of lights, they tend to be able to sit further forward because the mounting hardware is at the rear of the light, which is good. It allows you to pull the light further back along the rail space if the rail space and your grip allows you to do that. On this particular rifle, this is the Lantac Raven. I just got in for review. It's sitting right up there next to the Dragon. The Dragon is going to be a little bit more forceful. There's going to be a little bit more concussive force hitting the light than, say, with the HLX with the flash hider. So it's mounted that far forward, which normally I wouldn't prefer, but given the mounting that I had available to me, that's where the light ended up mounted. It's probably not going to stay there once I'm able to get a replacement, because as you can see, I have much more room to work with overall on the longer rail. It's a 14.5 inch pin. If I was going to shoot this rifle dedicatedly suppressed, or dedicatedly is actually not a word, dedicated suppressed, I probably wouldn't worry about it because the can body is going to extend well past the bezel of the light itself. Here's another 14.5 inch pin gun with Surefire War Comp, again, the HLX. It's sitting roughly, again, crown of the tine. If I can get the light below where the muzzle device starts, I prefer to do that. With the War Comp, I do have these ports, and if you were able to get a closer look at the flashlight body, you can see it's been discolored by the muzzle blast. But it hasn't created any issues. I'm during the review process. At this current state, I've got 1,500 rounds to this rifle without cleaning or servicing it or anything like that. But more importantly, to the subject of the video, I haven't had any issues with the light itself, which is what we're looking at. It's on an Ariska offset mount, so it sits a little bit higher. I could push it back a little bit further, but I kind of like the placement where it's at, and I haven't experienced any issues with the HLX lights on any of the rifles that I have where the muzzle energy, I should say, has caused any issues with the light body regardless of where the light was placed. Another issue that you get into with light placement is it going to make the light dirty? And the answer is yes, it's going to. Continual exposure to muzzle blast is going to discolor your lens, and it's going to clean off to a certain degree, but long-term exposure can create permanent issues with the lens depending on the material, quality, its specific placement, if you're using a flash hider, if you're using a brake. So I try to avoid that as much as possible. That's why the Cleanse, the product that my sister, or the Sage Dynamics sister company, Sage Instruments, came up with in cooperation with Theorem, was be able to protect the lens. Chapstick's an option, but chapstick tends to collect particulates, especially if you're shooting prone on a sandy range or just prone on any real dirt surface where there's going to be debris kicked up from the muzzle blast, or if you're inside of a shoot house where there's a lot of plywood and drywall and other particulates that could be floating around in the air. It sticks to the light, it steals your light faster. From a duty or a self-defense standpoint, if the light's clean and serviceable, you're good to go regardless of mounting position, because it's going to take a considerable amount of rounds within reason to begin to steal some of that light from you. So from strictly a self-defense standpoint, I'm not going to mount my light in a position to keep it cleaner longer if that position is going to somehow take away from my ability to control the rifle with my support hand, work controls, just general hand placement. From a training aspect or for a practice aspect, it can become aggravating if you have to clean your light or replace your light cleanses more often than you would otherwise. But everything's built and everything's positioned and everything's mounted with self-defense use in mind. So my advice is mount the light as far back as you comfortably can. Just keep in mind that if you're able to go further back, like bringing the bezel of the light even below the barrel onto the rail surface, that's going to create barrel shadow, and it's going to steal some of the light that you'd be able to push off in the opposite direction of where the light's mounted. So that can create issues of its own. But if you're worried about muzzle blast, or you're worried about your muzzle device actually damaging your light long term, the further back you can get it, the better. If you're going to shoot suppressed, it's not really an issue except when we talk about heat. Those thinner rails that allow you to mount the light closer to the suppressor, I've actually killed a few lights that way with really, really, really hot suppressors. It either cooked the electronics or it actually cooked the batteries off in the light. In that case, they were replaceable and it wasn't that big of a deal. Heat's a thing. Suppressors tend to get really, really hot, so keep that in mind. If you don't have a lot of room between your light and your suppressor, you may want to think about trying to offset it a little bit or mounting it in a place where it's not as likely to encounter the largest amount of heat generated from the suppressor. I'm Aaron Count with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.